Hi guys, I hope that you are having a great day. I know that we've been talking about a whole bunch of different key features of different graphs, but I wanted to make sure that you understand that these key features aren't just stuff that's made up, right? It's not just here's a graph, what's the key features? They have to do with real world situations, and each of those key features has real world meaning. So we're going to go just do this one example together and just talk through a couple of these key features and make sure we can see what they mean in real life. So this example here says, the graph below shows the relationship between the value of a washing machine in dollars and the time in years that it's been in use. So before we get started, let's get something straight. If I purchased a brand new washing machine, right, back in 2001, right? In 2001, that washing machine was top of the line. It was so much money and it worked great. But I still have that same washing machine now in 2020. Do you think it's worth the same amount of money? I paid so much money for it back then, but now it's not worth anything. I've used it about 1,000,000 times. It still works, but it's not worth the same amount of money. That is called something special. That is called, I'm going to write it off here to the side, that is called depreciation. And that, my friends, is a real world thing. Depreciation happens with washing machines, happens with cars, it happens with Xboxes, right? If you bought the Xbox 360 back in 2014, that Xbox 360 is not worth that same amount of money that you paid for it now, right? Because we have the Xbox One and all these other PlayStations and all that stuff. It depreciated in value. Its value went down. That happens over the years. So depreciation is what's happening to this washing machine. It's going down. One thing to quickly note is I know that we've been talking about slopes and key features. Look at this line, this graph. If you were just thinking about depreciation and you did not see that graph up there, you should think that depreciation means that it starts way up here at this amount of money and it's going down in years, right? So I would definitely say that depreciation gives me a negative slope. And that is proven right here in this graph, right? It has a negative slope. So depreciation, negative slope. Let's get into these real world situations and let's figure out what these four answers are. So my first question says, slope equals blank. Let's figure out what the slope is. Remember that slope can also be called, right, or the same thing as rate of change. And I am mentioning this because when we're talking about a real world situation, sometimes it makes more sense to call it rate of change because I can say from 1 year to 1 year, how much did it change? What rate did it change from year 1 to year 2, right? So let's look at that. The slope from this first year right here, if I follow that one all the way up, here was that washing machine at the first year. How much was it worth at that first year? At the first year, it was worth $400. Come the second year, it was right here. How much is it worth the second year? It's worth 300, right? So at the second year is worth 300. First year is 400. So in that year, how much did it go down? Let's figure this out. I can label these points, right? I can say that this is at 2, 300. And this point is at 1, 400. Well, remember that you are smart about slopes. We talked about that in a previous video. You are going to be smart about this. You can use two different things. You can use the slope formula, so let's use that one first. M equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, and we can fill that in. So let's see if this was my x1, y1, x2, y2. Let's fill in that formula. So 300 minus my y1 is 400 over x2 is 2 minus x1 is 1. Let's go ahead and do that math. 300 minus 400 is negative 100. 2 minus 1 is 1. Look at that. There is my slope. Does that make sense to us? Earlier when I asked you the difference from 1 year to 1 year, I said this first year was 400, the second year was 300. Does that make sense now that it's negative 100? Did it go down $100? From year 2 it was 300. Year 3 it went to 200. From 300 to 200, right? Then year 4 it was 100. It's going down by 100 each time. That's why I got negative 100 as my slope. You can do the same thing if you wanted to use rise over run. You could say from this point to this point, how much did I rise up? Well, I rised up not 2 units, but let's look at this. From 300 to 400, I rose 100 and ran 1 year this way. So that's why I got negative 100 over 1. That is my rate of change. So then it says under that slope, it says, what does this mean in the real situation? We kind of touched on that a little bit, actually a lot of it. So I would say what this means is for every 1 year, for every 1 year that passed, right? Every 1 year that passed, for every 1 year that passes, the washer, I'm going to say decreases because it's a negative slope, decreases in value, UE, decreases in value by $100. That is what that slope means in real life. Negative 100 over 1, it's decreasing in value each year. For every 1 year that passes, the washer decreases by $100. That is true about this slope. That's what the slope or the rate of change means in this situation. It doesn't just mean a rise over run or some made up situation. That's what it means in this context. So let's move on to that second question. Let's see what other ones that we can talk about, what other key features. This key feature, number 2, is asking for a y-intercept. We've talked about that. This is the x-axis. This is the y-axis right here. So the y-intercept is where it crosses the y, which is this point way up here. That y-intercept is at 0, 500. It's even labeled up there at the top for us, 0, 500. What does that mean in this situation though? What does that 0 in that point represent? 0 is down here, right? And this axis is our years. So 0 years, the 500 is on this side, so the 500 is meaning the dollars. So let's put that in a sentence. I'm going to write the sentence and you read it to yourself as I'm writing it. You read it to yourself in your mind as I'm reading this, as I'm writing it, to see if it makes sense to you. When the washer was first bought, it cost $500. Now you could have worded it differently. You could have said at year 0, the value of the washer was $500, or when before it depreciated, it started at $500, right? That is like the starting point. And I'm going to put that here because we sometimes and most often refer to that y-intercept as the starting point or the starting value. You will see that when we start actually taking these and you're going to make your own graphs, that y-intercept is always your starting point. It's your starting value. That's going to come really in handy when we start graphing. That y-intercept is the starting point. That's how much that washer started at, $500. An expensive washer, right? Okay, our next one says x-intercept. And it has zeros in parentheses to make sure we know that x-intercept means zeros. Our x-intercept is way down here on this x-axis. So let's talk about what this means. This x-intercept, perfect, it has it labeled for us. It's at 5, 0. That's our x-intercept. Now let's talk about what that means in context of this situation. What is happening at this point? Well, the 5 in this point is the x, and it's representing the years. The 0 in that point is right here labeling the y, which is at dollars. Again, I'm going to write this sentence while you read it in your head. You might try to come up with a sentence now. What's happening at that point? At 5, 0. What is happening? Maybe think about this graph. What's happening? If this was the starting point, this must be the end point, right? So let's write this sentence. You read it in your head and you let me know in just a second what you think. Okay, I wrote my sentence. It says, after 5 years, the washer was worth $0. And I put a little sad face because that's sad, right? It only lasted for 5 years. But what's happening is it hits 0 right here. Remember, 0 is the dollars on this side. After 5 years, it's finally down there at 0. It has no value left. Sad to say, right? It's worth nothing right there. Okay, we have one last question here that we can talk about. And it says, what does the point 1, 400 mean in this situation? So I'm going to go and look for that point on my graph. 1, 400. So 1, 400 is this point right here. That's the point that question 4 is talking about right there in red. Right? That is 1, 400. What does that mean in this situation? Well, let's look. The x down here is at 1, and that's our years, right? So 1 year, and if I look at the y, it's at 400, and that's talking about dollars. So let's put that representation and that connection together. 1 year, $400. I think we made that connection up there on that other first question. I'm going to write my sentence here, and I'm going to word it and say, after 1 year, the washer is worth $400. That's what we said, right? Looking at that graph, after 1 year, the washer was worth $400, right? Because this is when we first bought it, so in 1 year, it's worth $400. You could tell me what the other points mean, right? In 3 years, it was $200. In 4 years, it was $100. And then sadly, we talked about that 5-year mark, right? Nothing. Okay, so now I hope that you can see that yes, we can find these key features on a graph when you're given a graph, but also these key features, when you connect them to a real world situation, they have more meaning to them, right? Slope is not just a slope, it's what's happening in that situation. Y-intercept is not just a point where it touches the y-axis, it's our starting point in that scenario. It's how much was that money did it start with, or how much did we start with in this situation? You're going to see many different situations. The x-intercept is not just a point where it crosses the x-axis, but when you connect it to a scenario, it has a whole new meaning to it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please make sure you reach out to your teacher if you have any questions. Y'all are going to be great at this key features.